She found out she was being divorced the same way she found out she was supposedly barren, from a stranger. A journalist called her for comment on a medical report she had never seen, about a body she had lived in for 29 years, describing a condition that had been invented in a clinic her husband's family had paid off. She sat in her kitchen. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She picked up her coffee cup, finished it, set it down, and thought very clearly, very calmly, they think this is the end of my story. What they didn't know, what they could not have imagined, was that they had just handed her the only thing she had ever actually needed. A reason to stop being careful around people who had never deserved her caution in the first place. If this is the kind of story that makes you feel something, and it will, hit that subscribe button right now and join this channel. We tell stories like this every single week. Stories about women who refused to stay down. You do not want to miss a single one. Hannah Sunny Carter met Ji-hoon Kang in Atlanta, where he was completing his MBA and performing the role of a man who had outrun his inheritance. He was charming in the particular way that men who have never been told no become charming effortlessly, relentlessly, as though the world existed to confirm what they already believed about themselves. But there was something beneath the charm that felt sincere. A hunger. A restlessness. He told her he wanted to build something that belonged to him alone, not to the Kang name, not to his mother's ambitions, not to the dynasty that had been mapping his future since before he could speak. Sunny believed him. She was 27, brilliant, sharp-tongued, and in possession of a laugh so genuine that strangers turned toward it the way plants turn toward light. She had grown up watching her grandmother navigate a world that consistently underestimated her, and she had inherited, along with the woman's cheekbones and her Sunday cooking, the unshakable conviction that a woman's worth was something she defined for herself. Ji-hoon looked at her like she was the most interesting thing he'd ever encountered. They dated for 8 months in Atlanta. They were married at a small ceremony in Savannah, with her mother crying in the front row and Ji-hoon's family notably, pointedly absent. They moved to Seoul 6 weeks later, and it was in that 6 weeks that Sunny made the first mistake. She told herself that the family's absence at the wedding was simply tradition, simply distance, simply the kind of thing that would iron itself out with time and patience and genuine effort. She had no idea she was walking into a war. Seoul received her the way high society always receives an outsider who has committed the unforgivable crime of being loved by someone it considers its own. The scrutiny wasn't loud. That would have been too honest. It came in silences, in the particular stillness that fell when she entered rooms full of the Kang family's associates. It came in the way Ji-hoon's mother, Madam Kang Myong-hee, a woman of glacial poise and absolute ruthlessness, looked at her. Not with open hostility. With measurement. With the assessing gaze of a woman who had spent 60 years deciding what belonged in her world and what needed to be removed from it. Madam Kang never insulted Sunny directly. She was far too intelligent for that. Instead, she asked questions. Soft, polite, devastating questions. At dinner tables full of people who mattered, she would say things like, "Hannah, do you ever worry about your children growing up between two cultures? It must be so disorienting. So hard to know where you belong." She said these things with genuine seeming concern, and the room would absorb them, and Sunny would smile and answer gracefully, and no one would comment on what had actually just happened. What had just happened was a woman being told, in the most civilized language available, that she did not belong here. Ji-hoon, to his credit, defended her in the beginning. Small defenses, a word here, a changed subject there. But the Kang family was a gravitational force, and Ji-hoon, for all his Atlanta talk about independence, had been orbiting it since birth. The defenses grew shorter. The silences at home grew longer. And Sunny, who was made of tougher material than anyone in that family had bothered to understand, watched her husband slowly, incrementally, become someone who looked at her with a kind of apologetic exhaustion that was worse than hostility. Exhaustion meant he had already decided. He just hadn't told her yet. After 2 years of marriage with no pregnancy, Madam Kang moved. It was methodical. It was surgical. It was the kind of plan that could only be executed by someone who had spent decades learning exactly how power worked and exactly how little mercy it required. She found a clinic that owed the Kang family a considerable favor. She commissioned a medical document, official, stamped, formatted with the kind of authority that no one thinks to question, declaring that Hannah Carter suffered from a condition of irreversible infertility. The document was clinical in its language and catastrophic in its intent. It described a body that would never carry life. It described a woman who could never give the Kang dynasty what it needed. Madame Kang arranged for the document to be seen by 3 of Seoul's most well-connected social columnists before Sunny had been told it existed. That was how the journalist got the number to call. Ji-hoon came home that evening to find Sunny sitting at the dining table with the divorce papers his family's lawyers had apparently already prepared. She'd found them in his study, because he'd never been particularly thorough about hiding things from her, because some part of him had expected her to simply accept. Ji-hoon, she said, when he walked in. Sit down. He sat. He had the look of a man who had been rehearsing something and found, now that the moment had arrived, that the script had vanished. I know about the document, she said. He went very still. I know your mother commissioned it. I know it's false. And I know you knew. She looked at him steadily. I just need you to tell me, to my face, right now, whether any part of you actually believed I deserved this. The silence lasted a long time. Sunny. That's not a yes or a no. More silence. And in that silence, she had her answer. Not because he confirmed anything. Because the silence of a man who loves you doesn't sound like that. The silence of a man who has chosen something else is a specific, hollow thing, and Sunny had grown up surrounded by too many sharp, honest people to mistake it for anything other than what it was. Keep the papers, she said, standing. I'll sign them tomorrow. Your visa, he started. Is my problem, she said. Not yours. You've made that very clear. She walked to the bedroom and closed the door gently, because she refused even now, even in this, to give him the satisfaction of a slammed door. She sat on the edge of the bed they had shared for 2 years and breathed. She breathed for a long time. She counted the objects in the room, something her grandmother had taught her when she was 7 years old and terrified before her first piano recital. Count the real things, baby. They're still there. The dresser. The photograph she'd taken in Jeju on their honeymoon, the one where Ji-hoon was laughing at something just off camera. The book on his nightstand, still bookmarked at the same page it had been on for 3 months because he was always meaning to finish it. The running shoes by the door, too clean to have been used recently. She counted all the real things. And then she counted the things that were no longer real. The marriage. The life she'd believed she was building. The man she'd thought she'd married, who had turned out to be a performance staged for a season in Atlanta and quietly retired upon arrival in Seoul. She sat with the grief of that and didn't run from it. She had always believed that the only way out of a hard thing was directly through it. What she felt, underneath the grief, surprised her. It was not despair. Despair would have been proportionate. She was alone in a foreign country with a cancelled visa, a forged public diagnosis, and a reputation methodically dismantled by people with the resources and the ruthlessness to do it thoroughly. What she felt instead was a clean, cold fury. The fury of a woman who understands, finally and completely, exactly what was done to her and exactly how deliberately it was done, and who decides in the same breath that she is not going to let it be the end of the story. She picked up her phone and called her mother in Atlanta. "Mama," she said, when the call connected. "I'm okay. I just need you to know that before I say anything else." Her mother, who was a woman of enormous intuition, said, "What did they do?" And Sunny told her. All of it. She told her in a voice that was steady because she needed it to be, and her mother listened without interrupting, and when Sunny finished her mother was quiet for a moment and then said, "Come home, baby." "I'm not coming home," Sunny said. "Sunny. They want me to leave. They want me to go back to Atlanta with a forged diagnosis and a cancelled visa so that nobody in Seoul ever has to look at me again and feel uncomfortable about what they did." Her voice was steady and very clear. "I'm not going to do that." Her mother was quiet. "Then, what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," Sunny admitted. "But it's going to be something." She signed the divorce papers the next morning. She moved out of the apartment that afternoon. And she began, with the methodical calm of a woman who had decided not to waste grief on people who had never earned it, to rebuild. It took 3 months to secure a business visa, leveraged through a connection she had made at one of Madame Kang's own dinner parties. The irony was not lost on her. It took 2 more months to find Busan, which sat at the southern edge of the country and felt like a city that had never cared particularly about Seoul's opinion of anything. It had the sea and the light and the particular energy of port cities everywhere, slightly rough, entirely alive, indifferent to pretension. It was the first place in Korea that had felt, even faintly, like it might belong to her. Club Indigo found her the way good things sometimes do, through a chance conversation with a restaurateur named Park who had known the previous manager and was watching the lounge collapse into mediocrity with genuine sorrow. He described it to her over coffee and she found herself leaning forward, asking questions, already solving problems she hadn't been asked to solve. "Go see it," Park said. She went. She walked through the refurbished colonial building, all exposed brick and low light, and the kind of bones that reward people who understand what they're looking at, and felt something shift in her chest. Not sentimentality. Recognition. She could build something here. She negotiated the management contract in one meeting. She hired Korean jazz musicians who'd been overlooked by Seoul's bigger venues, men and women of extraordinary talent who were visibly startled to be called back, to be told their music was the entire point of the place. She designed a menu that wove together her Atlanta heritage and her 4 years of Korean immersion without apology, without explanation, without the self-consciousness of fusion food that doesn't trust itself. She remade Club Indigo into something people came to on purpose. Within 4 months, the waiting list stretched to 3 weeks. Within 6 months, Sunny had become the kind of presence in Busan's discreet upper circles that people mentioned in the specific tone of a recommendation that feels like a gift, carefully, selectively, to people they trusted. You need to go to Club Indigo. You need to meet the woman who runs it. She was building a life on her own terms. The Kang family, apparently, had not anticipated this, because in the 7th month she received a visit. 2 men in suits came on a Wednesday evening, just before the lounge opened. They were polite in the way that people who don't need to be impolite are polite. They told her that Busan was a long way from Seoul but not beyond the reach of certain families. They told her that her visa situation was fragile. They asked her, with great courtesy, whether she had given any thought to returning to America. Sunny looked at them and said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'll get you a table for next Thursday. I recommend the short rib. And then I'm going to need you to leave my establishment." They left. But she understood the message. The next visit would not be this civil. What she did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that from the corner booth at the back of the room, a man in his early 40s with unhurried eyes and a scotch he hadn't touched was watching the entire exchange with the focused attention of someone who had already decided how it would end. Daehyun Ryu came to Club Indigo the way powerful men come to places they've decided they like, without explanation, without announcement, with the settled authority of someone who doesn't require a reservation because the nature of who he is functions as one. He always took the corner booth. Always arrived before the room filled. Always ordered the same scotch that wasn't on the menu and accepted, with a nod that suggested he expected nothing less, that the lounge would find it. The staff was frightened of him the way people are frightened of weather, not irrationally, not with hostility, but with the instinctive respect accorded to forces that operate on their own logic. Sunny was not frightened of him. This was not bravado. It was something simpler. She had just spent 4 years being frightened of the wrong things, and she had resolved, going forward, to be more selective about what she gave her fear to. On the 3rd Tuesday, she brought the scotch herself. She set it down, didn't wait to be invited, sat across from him, and said, "You're going to need to tell me if there's something wrong with the glass or the temperature or the pour, because I had to call 4 distributors in 2 countries to find this bottle and I intend to make it worth the effort." He looked at her for a moment with the particular attention of a man who was not accustomed to being addressed this way and found, to his apparent surprise, that he didn't object to it. "The pour is fine," he said. "Good." She moved to stand. "Sit down," he said. And then, more quietly, "Please." She Saturday. "Who are you?" he asked. "I manage this place." "I know that." "Who are you?" It was a different question and they both understood it was a different question. She considered it. "I'm someone who came to this country with everything and left a marriage with nothing, and decided that the most effective response was to build something too good to ignore." She met his gaze. "Who are you?" A pause. Then, very slightly, one corner of his mouth moved. "Someone who came to this country with nothing and built something that couldn't be ignored. And has spent 20 years not being entirely sure that was the right decision." The string quartet started up at the other end of the room. They sat in what became, unexpectedly, a comfortable silence. "You were watching when those men came," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. You know who sent them." I know who they work for, he confirmed. And I know that if they come back, they won't be as polite. What are you going to do about it? She asked it, genuinely curious, not as a request. He picked up his scotch, considered it. I already did something about it, he said. They won't come back. She looked at him for a long moment. Why? She asked. You don't know me. And this was the moment Dae-hyun would think about it later, when he was trying to reconstruct exactly how this had happened to him. This was the moment he told her something true. Because you looked at them the way I wished someone had taught me to look at people like that when I was young, he said. And I'm tired of watching it happen to people who deserve better. Sunny held his gaze. That's a very specific reason. I'm a very specific person. She stood. Tuesday next week I'm getting a new bottle. Older vintage. I expect you to have an opinion about it. I'll be here, he said. And he was. If you're feeling something right now, if this story is getting under your skin the way great stories do, please like this video and drop a comment below telling us what you think of Sunny so far. Your support keeps us going. Now stay with us, because it's about to get so much deeper. What grew between Sunny and Dae-hyun over the following months was not the kind of thing that announced itself. It came in increments, in Tuesday evenings that stretched past closing time, in conversations that moved through registers neither of them had used with other people. Frank. Genuinely curious. Unperformed. He told her things about his childhood in Incheon he had never told anyone. The father who ran numbers for people he was afraid of and taught Dae-hyun, by example and necessity, that the world sorted itself into people who held leverage and people who didn't. The years of building, of calculating, of making himself indispensable to people who would otherwise have disposed of him, until indispensable became powerful and powerful became untouchable. He described a life constructed entirely from the outside in, built for survival so long that he'd never quite gotten around to figuring out what he was surviving for. What do you actually want? Sunny asked him one evening. Direct. No softening. He was quiet for a long time. I don't think anyone has ever asked me that. I'm asking. Another silence. And then, with the halting honesty of someone accessing a part of themselves they'd kept locked, something real. Something that isn't leverage. Something that doesn't need to be managed. He looked at her. I don't know if I know how to have that. You're learning, she said simply. You're doing it right now. He looked at her in a way that was so undefended it was almost uncomfortable. You're the most unusual person I've ever met. I know, she said, without vanity. It's taken a lot of work. He laughed, a real one. She realized she'd been keeping quiet score of his real laughs. There were not many. Each one felt like something earned. It was 3 months before he kissed her, and it happened the way things happen between two people who have been careful for a long time, suddenly, and with the accumulated weight of everything that had been building. Outside the lounge after a Tuesday that had run past midnight, rain just starting against the pavement. He had walked her to the door and then simply stopped. They stood very close, and she had said, Dae-hyun, and he had said, I know, and it had the quality of a conversation they'd been having for months finally reaching its necessary conclusion. What followed was not simple. He was a man whose world ran on danger, on leverage, on the grinding machinery of organized crime dressed in the clean suits of business. She knew this. She had never pretended not to know this. She asked him early on, how much of what you do requires you to hurt people? He didn't flinch. Less than it used to. More than I'd like. Is there an exit? Not clean. Not soon. He met her eyes. I won't lie to you about that. I'm not asking you to. She was quiet a moment. I need you to understand that I've already had one man curate the version of himself he thought I wanted to see. I would rather have the difficult truth of who you are than the comfortable performance of who you think I need. He held her gaze. The difficult truth is that I have done things that can't be undone and I operate in a world that doesn't have clean hands. The other difficult truth is that I would burn most of it down to protect you, and I'm aware that says something complicated about where I am right now. It says something honest, she said. Is that enough? She thought about it with the seriousness it deserved. It's a start. Don't give me reasons to regret taking it. He didn't. In the months that followed, he was in ways that kept surprising her a man of extraordinary care. Not softness. Attentiveness. The deep, focused attention of a man who had spent decades reading people for threat and was now choosing, deliberately, to read one person for joy. He noticed things. The food she reached for when she was tired. The particular quality of silence that meant she was working through something difficult and didn't need input, just presence. The way she held herself when a room was trying to diminish her, and the slightly different way she held herself when she felt completely safe. He learned her the way he had learned everything in his life, thoroughly, patiently, like a man who understood that the things worth having required real investment. One night, very late, long after the lounge had emptied, they sat in the silence of Club Indigo with the sea audible through the cracked back window and the remains of a meal between them. Daehyun said, out of nowhere, "Tell me what you imagined when you were a girl. What your life was going to look like." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I've been thinking about it all day and I don't know the answer." She considered the question. "I imagined something busy. A lot of people around. A lot of noise. A kitchen that always had something on the stove." She paused. "I imagined being somewhere that felt like mine. Not inherited. Not borrowed. Mine." "What feeling did you most want?" he asked. "Safe," she said simply. "And chosen. Not tolerated. Not managed. Actually, specifically chosen." He looked at her across the table in the low light of the place she had built from almost nothing, and found the words for something that didn't come easily to him. "You are," he said. "For whatever it means, coming from someone whose judgment has been, historically, complicated. You are the most specifically chosen person in my life. Daehyun." "I'm saying it once," he said, with the slight defensiveness of a man who has spent 2 decades not saying things like that. "You don't need to make a thing of it." "I'm absolutely making a thing of it," she said. "I expected that." But he was smiling. Later that same night, when he was preparing to leave, he paused at the door and said, without turning, "Whatever happens next, with the Kangs, with the visa, with any of it, I need you to know that I'm not a bystander in your life. I'm not a resource you can call on when you need the particular kind of help I'm equipped to provide." He turned. His face was very serious. "I'm here. Completely. That's not a thing I've said to anyone before. I'm saying it to you." She crossed the room, stood in front of him and said, "I know. I've known for a while. I was waiting for you to catch up." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, one of the real ones, and she counted it, the way she always counted them. 7 months after that rainy night outside the lounge, she sat in a clinic bathroom in Busan and stared at a test result for 40 minutes. When the word finally resolved into comprehension, when her body understood what her mind was telling it, she felt the floor tilt beneath her. Not from distress. From the massive, seismic shock of realizing that the story she had been told about herself was false. That the document that had stripped her of her marriage, her visa, her standing, that the entire architecture of her humiliation had been built on a complete and deliberate lie. She was not barren. She had never been barren. She was 5 weeks pregnant. She sat with that for 40 minutes. She let it move through her in waves, grief for the years she'd spent carrying the weight of a false diagnosis, fury at the people who'd put it there, and underneath both of those, something she hadn't expected, a joy so profound and uncomplicated it felt almost foreign. The pure, clean joy of a life beginning. Her child. Her body. Her truth, reclaiming itself. She went to find Daehyun. He was already at the lounge, sitting in his corner booth with paperwork and that same scotch, and he looked up when she walked in and something on her face made him put everything down immediately. "Come sit," he said. She Saturday. She put the test on the table between them. He looked at it for a long moment. Then at her. "Sunny. I know," she said. "I know what the document said. I know what we were told." "The document was a lie," he said. It wasn't a question, he had known this for months, had had the forensic evidence long before this moment. He had been waiting for the right time to tell her and understood now that it didn't matter who told her first. What mattered was this. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, and she watched something move across his face she had never seen there before. Something entirely unguarded. Something that, in a man this controlled, this architecturally defended, was the most vulnerable thing she had ever witnessed. His eyes were bright. "A child," he said. Very softly. Almost to himself. Yes, she said. He raised his gaze to hers and she saw in it something she recognized from her own chest, that same profound, uncomplicated joy. Clean and real and nothing to do with leverage or power or the grinding calculations of the world they had each navigated for so long. I want to do this properly, he said. I want to be someone this child is proud of. I want to build something clean enough that they can inherit it. He paused. I know that's not a small thing to ask, given. Dae-hyun, she said. Yes. You're already doing it. She squeezed his hand. You've been doing it for months. You just haven't given yourself credit. He turned her hand over in his and pressed his lips to her palm, briefly, and she felt the weight of everything he couldn't quite say contained in that single gesture. I'll make it safe, he said. For both of you. For all three of us. Whatever it takes. I know, she said. That's one of the things I trust you on. In the weeks that followed, he worked. Quietly, methodically, with the focused patience of a man who understood that the most important construction projects required the most solid foundations. He restructured holdings. He placed the child in a legal framework so layered and secure it would withstand any challenge the Kang family's lawyers could conceive. He assembled, without fanfare, a private medical team of a standard that Madame Kang herself could not have accessed through her usual connections. And he had his people finish the forensic reconstruction of every document, every transfer record, every communication that had ever touched the false medical report. Not yet deployed. Held. Prepared. Waiting for the moment when it would accomplish the most. Sunny watched him and thought, this is what love looks like in a language built entirely from protection. She was 8 months pregnant when the gold envelope arrived. She found it on a Thursday morning, heavy in her hand in the way that things designed to assert power tend to be heavy. She opened it at the bar, alone, before the staff arrived, and read it twice. Ji-hoon Kang and Seo Yerin request the honor of your presence. A masquerade gala celebrating their union and the announcement of the Kang-Seo corporate merger. Seoul. 3 weeks hence. Black tie. Masks required. Her name on the envelope was Hannah Carter. Not Hannah Kang. Carter, her own name, the name the Kang family had always treated as evidence of insufficiency. Its presence on this envelope was a message dressed in courtesy. We know where you are. We know you haven't left. Come and watch us win. When Dae-hyun arrived that evening, she slid it across the table to him without a word. He read it. Set it down. Was quiet in the way he was quiet when he was thinking something through completely before speaking. He wants you there, Dae-hyun said. Yes. He wants you to see her. His new wife. The merger. Everything the family built after you. He paused. And the charity grant, the fertility one. I know about it. A televised announcement of a grant for international fertility research, to be made at the gala with great ceremony. Crafted, she understood perfectly, as a scalpel. A gift to women who suffer as my first wife suffered. Said in front of cameras and 300 people, with Sunny Carter supposedly somewhere in the room to receive the full blade of it. He thinks you've been quietly surviving in Busan, Dae-hyun said. Carrying the diagnosis. Carrying the humiliation. He thinks you're going to walk into that room diminished. Yes, she said. He doesn't know about the baby. No. A silence settled. Dae-hyun looked at the envelope, then at her. What do you want to do? He asked. Entirely serious. Not a man making a plan. A man asking her what she needed. She breathed. I spent 4 years in that world making myself smaller, she said. Quieter. More acceptable. I changed the way I dressed and the way I spoke and I learned a whole language and it was never going to be enough, because they didn't want me to be enough. They wanted me to be grateful and subordinate and I wasted 4 years trying to find a version of myself they would accept. Her voice was steady and very clear. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life wondering if the people who tried to destroy me know what they actually destroyed. Tell me what you want, he said again. I want to walk into that room as who I actually am, she said. I want Ji-hoon and his mother and every person in that ballroom who ever whispered about the foreign wife to see the life I built. I want them to understand that you don't get to write someone's story for them. Her jaw was set. And I want that document on the screen. The doctor's confession. I want every person in that room to know, on the record, in front of cameras, what the Kang family actually did. Daehyun was quiet for a moment. If we do this, he said carefully, the merger falls apart. Jihoon's stock craters. His mother faces criminal exposure. The Kang name takes damage it won't recover from for years. I know. And your name is attached to it. To all of it. To me. Are you ready for that? She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had spent 20 years building an empire in shadows and was asking her, with complete seriousness, whether she understood the weight of choosing him in public. Not out of doubt. Out of respect. Daehyun, she said. I have been attached to far more dangerous people and got far less in return. He breathed. Something in his shoulders settled. Then we go, he said quietly. And we don't apologize for a single second of it. The grand ballroom of the Lotte Hotel's penthouse floor held 300 of the most connected people in South Korea. Politicians. Billionaires. Press. A room full of people for whom image was currency and scandal was catastrophic debt. Jihoon Kang stood at the front in a bespoke suit, his new wife Seo Yerin beside him, beautiful, composed, and visibly pregnant. The merger with the Seo banking empire had been 3 years in the making and tonight was its coronation. Flashbulbs. Champagne. The easy laughter of people who have decided everything is going well. At 9:40, a publicist whispered in Jihoon's ear that everything was on schedule. The charity announcement at 9:45. The merger at 10. At 9:43, the heavy double doors of the ballroom opened. The room didn't go silent all at once. It went silent the way a tide goes out gradually, then suddenly, as the awareness spread from the people nearest the door outward through the crowd, until the string quartet was the only sound in the room, and then one by one even the musicians stopped. 6 men in black entered first. Not bulky. Not theatrical. Simply present in a way that communicated, without any language at all, that the calculus of the room had changed. Then Sunny. She wore emerald silk that moved like water, custom cut to embrace rather than disguise the full, magnificent arc of her pregnancy. Her natural hair was gathered in a crown of absolute precision, adorned with diamonds that caught the ballroom's engineered light and threw it back improved. She held herself the way she had always held herself when she felt completely safe, unhurried, undefended, entirely present. She looked like someone who had decided they were done asking for permission. The room processed her in pieces. The face. The gown. The diamonds. And then the stomach, undeniable, enormous, radiating the specific vitality of a woman in the final weeks of pregnancy who has been very well cared for and knows it. Daehyun stepped up beside her. His hand moved to the small of her back, not possessive, not a display. A placement. The gesture of a man indicating which way he was facing, permanently. The room that had been silenced by Sunny's arrival went a different kind of still at the sight of him. The people who recognized him, and there were many, because in certain circles the name Daehyun Ryu operated less like a name and more like a weather system, went the particular color of people who have just understood that they are in the presence of something that cannot be managed or negotiated or smiled at. Jihoon's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes found Sunny's stomach and couldn't leave it. Madame Kang, standing slightly to her son's left, went very still in the way of someone whose mind is working at speed while their body has not yet caught up. Sunny walked into the room at exactly the pace she chose. We are at the peak of this story, the moment you have been waiting for. Before we go any further, if this is hitting different right now, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. This is for every woman who was told she wasn't enough. Now stay with us, because the best part is still coming. It was Madame Kang who moved first. She stepped forward through the crowd with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had spent 60 years controlling every room she entered, and she said, in Korean, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, "You were told to leave this country." The room held its breath. Sunny answered in Korean, the clean, unaccented Korean she had spent 4 years quietly perfecting, the Korean she had never chosen to offer this family because she had been waiting for a moment that deserved it. "I was told many things by your family, Madame Kang," she said. "Most of them were lies. I think you know which one we're here to discuss." Madame Kang's composure flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough for the nearest people to see it happen. Jihoon came forward. His mask was pushed up on his forehead, and without it his face was undefended in a way that made him look suddenly very young and very unprepared. "Sonny," he said. His voice had a quality she had never heard in it, something ragged underneath the surface. The doctors said you couldn't." "The doctor was paid to say that," she said simply. "By your family. On your behalf. I didn't know about the Ji-hoon." Her voice was not unkind. It was the tone of someone who has thought about something so many times that the emotion has been processed down to bedrock. What's left is just truth. "Please don't. Not tonight. Not in front of all these cameras." He stopped. Looked at her stomach. Looked at Dae-hoon. Looked back at her. And she saw it happen. She saw the exact moment when Ji-hoon Kang understood the full geometry of what he had lost. Not the child, he hadn't known about the child until this second. But Sunny herself. The person she had been and the person she had become without him, and what the difference between those two people said about what 4 years with his family had cost her and what 4 years without them had given her back. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Dae-hoon had been still and quiet through all of this, standing slightly behind her right shoulder because this moment did not belong to him and he understood that completely. He had spent 20 years being the most powerful presence in every room he entered. He could afford, tonight, to be the structure behind someone else's reckoning. He spoke once. When Ji-hoon, desperate for something to hold on to, looked at Dae-hoon with an expression that hovered between confusion and challenge, as if the situation might yet be retrievable if he could just find the right angle on it, Dae-hoon met his gaze with complete calm and said, quietly enough that it carried only to the immediate circle. "You spent 4 years trying to make her believe she was diminished. Look at what she built instead. Look at her." A pause. "And then look at what you're holding." Ji-hoon looked down, involuntarily, at his champagne glass. Dae-hoon said nothing else. He didn't need to. Sunny touched his arm, the small, barely perceptible signal they had agreed on, and from somewhere at the back of the room, Dae-hoon's technical team accessed the gala's main projector. The merger presentation deck disappeared. What replaced it was a medical document. Official. Stamped. The Kang Clinic's letterhead at the top. The date. The fabricated diagnosis. And alongside it, in a split screen rendered with merciless clarity, a second document, a financial transfer record showing the payment from a Kang family holding company to the clinic 3 weeks before the document's date. The room made a sound that wasn't quite noise, a collective, involuntary intake of breath. Then the second window opened. A man in his 60s, sitting very straight in a room with the institutional quality of a police station. He had the look of someone who has been afraid for a long time and has recently discovered, to his own relief, that the thing he was most afraid of has already happened. He read a statement in a voice that didn't waver. He described the document. The payment. The instruction not from Ji-hoon directly, but from the office that handled Madame Kang's personal accounts. He described what he had fabricated, and why, and for how much, and what had been done with the result. The room was absolutely silent. Somewhere, she turned to the room instead, not theatrically, not with a speech. She simply let them look at her. All of them. 300 of the most connected people in South Korea, every camera, every journalist who would have this story filed before midnight. She let them see her, the woman they'd whispered about, the foreign wife supposedly revealed as Barren and sent home in disgrace, standing there radiant and real and fully, magnificently present. She said, to the room, in Korean, "What was done to me was done to silence me. It didn't work. I'd like you all to remember that. That was all." She took Dae-hoon's hand. He closed his fingers around hers with the deliberate pressure of someone holding something that matters. They turned and walked toward the doors. Behind them, the room erupted. Ji-hoon's name would be trending within the hour. The merger suspension would be announced formally by morning. The doctor's confession would be replayed on every major Korean news channel by the following evening, and the Kang family's lawyers would find that every document their opponents possessed was so forensically complete there was no avenue of challenge that didn't make the exposure worse. None of this was what Sunny was thinking about as she walked through those doors. She was thinking about the elevator she and Dae-hoon stepped into 30 seconds later, the steel doors closing them into a quiet capsule above the noise. She was thinking about the way her daughter, she knew, with the absolute irrational certainty of someone who has stopped second-guessing their own instincts, moved inside her in that precise moment, as if she'd felt the shift. The change in gravity. The air after something long held finally releases. Daehyun looked at her. She was crying. She hadn't noticed until she saw his face change that undefended softness she'd come to understand was the most truthful version of him, and felt the warmth on her own cheeks. "Hey," he said, quietly. "Hey. I'm okay," she said. "I'm really okay. I needed." "I know," he said. He turned to face her fully, raised both hands, and gently framed her face, the tattooed hands, the ones that had built an empire out of shadows, holding her face with the particular care of a man who understood that some things were too important for anything but complete gentleness. He brushed the tears with his thumbs. He didn't tell her not to cry. He didn't say anything that would minimize the size of what had just happened. He simply held her face and let her feel it. "It's over," she said. Not the crying, the carrying of it. The 4-year weight of a lie she'd been handed and told to call her own story. "It's over," he confirmed. She breathed. In the small, contained world of the elevator, with the noise of the ballroom somewhere above them and Seoul glittering below, she let herself feel the full width of it, the grief and the fury and the joy and the strange, clean relief of a woman who has fought something and won and gets to know, definitively, that she won. The elevator reached the lobby. Daehyun lowered his hands to her shoulders. "Ready?" She looked at him. The man who had chosen her, not the managed version, not the acceptable version, but the actual Hannah Carter, sharp and complicated and entirely herself. "More than I've ever been," she said. The glass doors slid open and Seoul opened before them, and she walked into it, not running, not escaping, not the woman who had been exiled or diminished or told she was less than she was. Just Sunny. Walking out on her own terms. The way she always should have. 3 weeks after the gala, Ji-hoon Kang issued a public apology. His lawyers drafted it, his publicist refined it, and he delivered it in the flat, stiff voice of a man who understands he has run out of options and has confused that understanding with remorse. He acknowledged that a medical document had been falsified. He did not say his mother commissioned it, though the financial records made that omission meaningless. He expressed regret for any distress caused. He did not say her name. The clip that traveled furthest across the internet was not the document on the projector or the doctor's confession. It was Sunny, turning to face the room and saying in perfect Korean, with the unhurried clarity of someone who has stopped performing for other people's comfort, "What was done to me was done to silence me. It didn't work. I'd like you all to remember that." 12 million views by the end of the first week. Madam Kang retained a criminal defense attorney on the 3rd day and became, in the language of the society columns that had once fawned over her, unavailable for comment. The Kang-seo merger was formally terminated on day 4. Ji-hoon's stock stabilized at a level that suggested the market had decided he was salvageable but permanently diminished, which was, Sunny thought, exactly what he deserved. Not ruin. Just consequence. She did not spend much time thinking about Ji-hoon Kang. She had a daughter to prepare for. The nursery at their home in Busan took shape over those final weeks in a way that delighted her. Not because of the money spent, which was considerable. Because of the way Daehyun approached it. He researched. Meticulously. He read articles about infant sleep environments, about developmental significance of color and light, about what the research said about the things that actually mattered in the early months of a child's life. He asked questions with the earnest seriousness of a man who had always applied that quality of attention to acquiring power and was now applying it to something that actually warranted it. One evening she found him on the nursery floor with a manual for a wooden rocking chair he was attempting to assemble, the focused furrow between his brows that meant he had encountered something not immediately solvable. "Do you need help?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, holding a bolt in each hand, his expression one that would have been, in any other context, terrifying. "The instructions," he said, "are written by a person who despises the people who buy this furniture." She started laughing. She laughed until she had to lean against the door frame, and he watched her with an expression of tremendous dignity that made her laugh harder, and then, reluctantly, inevitably, he laughed too. "Leave the chair," she said, when she could speak. "We'll figure it out together." He set down the bolt. He came and sat beside her on the floor, and she leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in the simple, specific peace of two people who have been through something enormous together and have come out the other side into something ordinary and real and theirs. "Are you afraid?" she asked him. Of being a father. A long pause. Yes, he said. No qualification. Good. Good. It means you understand the size of it. She looked at the warm walls, the soft light, the half-assembled chair that had defeated a man who controlled shipping lanes. I'm afraid too. I'm afraid I won't do it well enough. I'm afraid she'll feel the weight of everything that happened before she arrived. She won't, Daehyun said, with a certainty that surprised her. How do you know? Because she has you for a mother. And you are the most relentlessly forward-moving person I've ever encountered. You don't pass the weight on. You transmute it into something else. You've been doing it since the day I met you. She was quiet for a moment. That's one of the nicest things you've ever said to me. Don't make a thing of it, he said, with enormous dignity. I'm absolutely making a thing of it. I expected that, he said. And the corner of his mouth moved in that way she had learned to recognize as the thing he did instead of smiling when smiling felt like too much to give, and he gave it anyway. Their daughter arrived on a Tuesday morning, which Sunny would always find privately funny. She came into the world with a decisiveness that the midwife described as refreshing and that Daehyun, who had been present throughout, privately described as the most frightening and miraculous thing he had ever witnessed. They named her Aria. Not a Korean name, not an American name, a name that belonged to music, to the long human tradition of making beauty out of the most intense emotional experiences available. A name that said, I came from two worlds and I am the best of both of them and I am not confused about my worth. Daehyun held her for the first time with the careful, reverent focus of a man who had held power all his life and had never, until this moment, held something he was afraid of dropping. He looked at her face, the precise, particular face of a person who had not existed yesterday and would exist, now, for the rest of time, and said nothing for a long while. Then he looked at Sunny. She looks like you, he said. She looks like both of us, Sunny said. She looks like you, he said again, and his voice had something in it she had only heard a handful of times, undefended, stripped of everything a man builds to survive by being impossible to read. Just Daehyun. Just a man who had spent his life building things that couldn't be touched, holding now the one thing in the world that was worth all of it. Somewhere in Seoul, a dynasty was dismantling itself one press release at a time. Somewhere on the internet, 12 million people had watched a woman in an emerald gown refuse to be silenced. And in a room that caught the morning light in Busan, on the city's southern edge where the sea was always audible and the garden had been loved by someone before them, a family of 3 existed in the first hours of their ordinary, irreplaceable life. Arya Carteriou slept. Her mother watched her breathe. Her father didn't put her down for a very long time. And that is the story of Hannah Sunny Carter, the woman they tried to erase and instead forged into something they could never contain. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel right now and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below what moment hit hardest. The kitchen, the elevator, the nursery floor, and if you know someone who needs to hear a story about a woman who refused to stay down, share this video with them today. We will see you in the next one.